The diaconate was the first thing that the Archbishop asked me to do, and so it's now been almost 11 years that I've been the director. And it's a great joy. We have 270 active deacons working in the Archdiocese in our 100 parishes, and we have another 60 men in formation for the diaconate. So it's a big program, and we start a new cohort each year, and actually we have one of our institutions this evening. But I got the call, and the question was, what is the role of a deacon? And she said, you've got about 20 minutes. Bev was real nice. She said, you've got 20 minutes to tell the role of the deacon. And I'm thinking, okay, which role of the deacon am I going to share in 20 minutes? Because the reality is that the deacon has multiple roles. The ordained deacon has multiple roles in the church. But we are principally ordained for a threefold ministry. The ministry of the Word, Liturgy, and Charity. And oftentimes I think the role of the deacon as a servant or a server at the altar, while that is a reality that we are called to serve at the altar, sometimes ends up pushing the role of the deacon to something that is actually less than what was intended by the church when the diaconate, particularly the permanent diaconate, was reinstituted just about 50 years ago. So here in the United States, we will have had permanent deacons. There are exceptions, of course, but the diaconate was actually approved by the bishops of the United States and by Rome. It'll be 50 years in 2018 is when we'll have that anniversary. Prior to that, of course, the diaconate had become, over a 1,500-year period, a transitional step onto the priesthood, and so people didn't think too much of the deacon and his role that he has in the church. Most people didn't see the deacon in the Catholic Church. The deacon was literally 6 months to a year from being ordained a priest, and a lot of times they were in their seminary, so you really didn't have any interaction with the deacon. So what's happened over the last 50 years is kind of a beginning understanding of who is this person that's called to be a deacon, and what is his role in the church. And that was fairly well spelled out initially, right after the Second Vatican Council, when Pope Paul VI is the one that actually signed the document that reinstituted this as a permanent part of orders. So there are three components to holy orders. The one is the diaconate, the priesthood, and then the bishop. And so we have orders, but we don't have the fullness of holy orders, but we do have the sacrament of orders. And we are, by canon law, members of the clergy as soon as we are ordained a deacon. We're not just older altar servers. We actually are ordained ministers of the church. And we are ordained with the responsibility of serving the bishop. And that's made very clear even during the rite of ordination, when we promise obedience to the bishop and to his successors. But we serve principally in parishes with the cooperation and the permission of the pastor where the deacons are assigned. And in our 100 parishes, and we have deacons serving right now in about 90 of our parishes. There are still a few that do not have deacons. The role of the deacon will vary in large part based on what the pastor has determined he wants that role of the deacon to be, or in the case of a parish where there's been a long-standing tradition, they kind of follow whatever the example has been there in the past. And then that can evolve as you get new pastors coming on board. So, for example, at Transfiguration, where your pastor had been here for 25 plus years, the deacons had certain roles in the parish, and if I come here to Transfiguration and I see the things the deacon does in the parish here, and even in the liturgy, it can be dramatically different sometimes than what I see if I go to another parish in the diocese, or even my own personal experience of deacon in multiple parishes where I have served over the last 12 years. And what we need to understand is there are very specific roles that the deacon is called for. So most specifically, the role of the deacon in the liturgy is the proclaiming of the gospel. Okay? So if there is a deacon present at the liturgy, the intention is that the deacon will proclaim the gospel. When the priest proclaims the gospel at Mass, he's doing that still in his role as deacon, because he was deacon and now he's also priest. But he does that because the deacon is the one that's called to be the proclaimer of the word. There are other things that we do on the altar, obviously. We are considered the minister of the cup. That doesn't necessarily mean that we are only supposed to hold the chalice to distribute the precious body and blood, or the precious blood of Christ. But what it does mean is that when the altar is being prepared, typically it is an acolyte or the deacon who has responsibility for preparing the altar. Now, culturally, parishes are different, and you do things in a very particular way here at Transfiguration as well. But the responsibility for setting the altar, preparing the gifts, the pouring of the wine into the chalice for the celebrant, the commingling of the water and the wine. If the deacon is present and serving on the altar, that's the deacon's responsibility to do those things in preparation and setting the altar for the liturgy of the Eucharist. In addition, though, the role that the vast majority of our deacons have that people don't see is those things that they're doing outside of the liturgy. In fact, when I was in formation, I remember one of our instructors was talking to us about the role of the deacon, and one of his comments was that, we really don't need any more liturgical flower pots. We don't need deacons who simply serve on the altar. That is really not our primary purpose. That ministry of word and liturgy is critical, but the ministry of charity is really at the core of who the deacon is supposed to be and the role that the deacon's supposed to have. And that doesn't take anything away from the role that the deacon has in liturgy. But what it should do is it should enhance, because the role that we have in charity is hopefully bringing more people to that liturgical celebration, the Eucharist, as well. So that when we're working, for example, outside of the confines of the parish, and that's a great danger because many of our deacons become very parochial once they're ordained. We never see them again. As the director of the diaconate, it's like herding cats to get my deacons to come together for different events and convocations and masses of recommitment. It's tough, it's challenging, but they're actually we're called to be out into the community, to be the visible sign of the church sacramentally outside of the church. And that was the intent for the diaconate being restored 50 years ago. And the birth of that really began during the Second World War in the concentration camps, where they had the clergy, both Catholic and non-Catholic, in a particular area, and Dachau was one of the principal ones. It was called Der Priesterblock. And it was the discussions among those members of the clergy that said, how did we get the world into the state that it's in now, and what would we do different? And one of the things that they talked about, which was the seeds of the restoration even of the permanent diaconate in the Catholic Church, was we need the sacramental sign of the church as a servant taking care of God's people, showing the love, the mercy of Jesus Christ sacramentally outside of the church. So our guys serve in a lot of different places. We do prison ministry. Deacon Dick Tolcher is in charge of that for the Archdiocese of Atlanta, and we have deacons all over the diocese that go to prisons and do that on a very regular basis. We also are blessed to have some wonderful priests that do it to carry the additional sacramental things that need to go, because obviously the deacon doesn't say Mass. The deacon hears confessions all the time, but we are not allowed to absolve, not sacramentally. And so that's what the priest needs to be there for, obviously, in the prison environment. But our deacons are there. In the hospitals, we have quite a few of our deacons who are involved almost in full-time work with hospice, visiting the sick, visiting the homebound, working in, a lot of times, even outside of Catholic Church, charitable organizations. Certainly we see our deacons involved with St. Vincent de Paul and those other kinds of things. But what they talk about in terms of the role of the deacon is that the deacon is called to be a servant leader. So he can set the example for others as a leader to draw them into these additional charitable roles that the church calls for each and every one of us to do, to be out there, to be visibly involved with. And again, not to push the responsibilities that we have liturgically, but those are sort of icing on the cake. in my opinion. It is those things where we're actually hands and feet on the ground, interacting with people on a daily basis. That is what we are really and truly called to do on a regular basis, and hopefully the parishes support and help fuel that. The other thing that a lot of our deacons get involved with is starting new ministries. Now, you already have a huge host of ministries at Transfiguration, so I'm sure that Father's not waiting in line for people to come and tell him about all the new ones that need to be initiated. But oftentimes that is not the case, and so the deacon, being the servant out in the community, will recognize oftentimes the needs that are there, and he will bring those forward to say, maybe this is something we need to get involved with. So for example, I don't know how many of you are familiar with the Embrace Ministry for the loss of a child during pregnancy, but the Embrace Ministry had its beginnings by someone approaching a deacon, actually in this case it was me, and saying, where do I go to get this started? And so fortunately we were able to bring that to the Archbishop and his pastoral council, and he heard and listened, and on a very large scale he said, we need to make this happen. And then he looked at me and said, and the deacons should be the ones to get it going. And so then we started training deacons. They went out into the parishes. Now we have a lot of lay people that are involved with the program as well. And there are Embrace ministries in multiple parishes, and it's actually even expanded outside the Archdiocese of Atlanta, where we've got several other dioceses in the United States now that have the Embrace ministry. And it went from being under the umbrella of the Archdiocese to actually becoming an independent 501c3, so the diocese doesn't even financially have to support it any longer. This is the kind of thing that we are called to do, to help incubate, to initiate, to find the new leaders to take over. And oftentimes what happens is that in some environments, the role of the deacon becomes, kind of being pushed into more of an administrative role within the parish. And that can be a challenge. That can be a significant challenge. And you've got Deacon Kevin here who wears two different hats. Kevin serves here with the skills that he has as an administrator and business manager, but he also goes over to another parish where he becomes the servant leader, the deacon in the parish. That is not to say that he is not a deacon 24/7, and I would be very surprised if there aren't times when you get tapped even here, because if somebody else is not around. But that happens. But what can also happen, there's a kind of a danger of being the deacon pushed into a strictly administrative role, and he misses that opportunity to be ministering to people. There's a whole nother side of it that I'm involved with, because I've been working in the chancery for going on a little over 11 years, and there's even the danger of that becoming a bureaucratic kind of an administrative position. So what the deacon has to do, and I have to do even, is constantly be reminded, I'm also there to help minister to the people that I work with on a daily basis. That's part of my role, serving them, listening to their needs and helping them, in addition to the administrative type of responsibilities that I have. But what we don't want to do is we don't want to pigeonhole, and assume that there's a great fallacy kind of that a lot of people have is, well, we have a shortage of priests, so we'll put the deacons in to do the job. And then that is not the solution to the problem. But that ties me back to something else that I want to mention, and that's the importance of allowing the deacon to do the roles that he was ordained to do, even in the parish environment, because he then is allowed to become that living example in the parish community of the role of this person who is part of the clergy, but he also has a foot in the world of the laity. The vast majority of deacons are married. We have families, children, wives. Most of them have secular jobs outside of the church, so they are part of the world, and then they have this connection, this bridge connection back into the church. And we want to allow our deacons to be visible enough in the communities where they serve, even as a parish, as an example of how that can be done. In the hope, obviously, of having more men open their hearts and their minds to the reality that God may be calling them to that particular vocation. And at the same time, it creates an opportunity for us to also interact a lot of times with men or women who are also discerning vocation, either to the priesthood or to the religious life, and kind of initiate some discussion, just because they might be like, how do you do that? What does that exactly mean? Because we may know them in a different way because of the ministries that we're involved with. And then, like every other vocation, it starts with an invitation. Just like a relationship and a marriage starts with an invitation. It's the first date. The same thing is true with vocations. And so the deacon can be part of that process to assist in that way as well. So I think it's important that we recognize that the deacon has really multiple roles in the church, that we not pigeonhole them into some specific category, and be open to the possibility of using them in a lot of other places and ways, and using the gifts and the talents that they have to advance that idea, that concept of being a servant leader, to the degree that they can exercise whatever skills and talents that they might have. Leadership talents, speaking talents, God bless you, the ability to articulate, again, as a member of the clergy, why it's also very, very important to put a focus on the family, the responsibility that we have as husbands and fathers to recognize that the family is the core of all of this. And it's the core of really the church is the family. We start with that domestic church at home, and that we have the ability to try to balance that. Now, I say all these things, and we've got deacons in the room. Bruce has been one for a really, really long time, and he can share with you that
really long time.
I don't say that as a pejorative. I say that out of respect. He has experienced a lot of things that I have not experienced in my 12 years as deacon. He's seen the evolution of the deacon, both in this local church, I'm talking about the Archdiocese of Atlanta, even in this parish, and even in the larger community. But I travel all over the United States. I'm involved with the National Association of Diaconate Directors, and so I hear the gamut of the roles of the deacon in different places. And in some places, they have a very small role. But in this archdiocese, Archbishop Gregory feels very strongly that the diaconate is an opportunity to spread the good news into communities that all of his priests cannot get to, and to be there as that sacramental sign of the church to help empower the laity to get even that much more involved in the work that they can do of spreading the good news of the gospel to everybody that we encounter. And I think in a very particular way in this year of mercy that the Holy Father has called for, I think we are given a really unique opportunity to act in that role, to be that minister of mercy. I just did a retreat actually up in Norwich, Connecticut for deacons and their wives 2 weekends ago, where we talked specifically about being that minister of mercy to the people that we encounter, and that example of the Good Samaritan, really taking care of our brothers and sisters, those who are Catholic, those who are non-Catholic, and then hopefully by doing that also creating an opportunity to evangelize, to be able to share the good news. First, with obviously the people that we encounter on a regular basis in our church, but we go outside of our church, not because the Catholics are there, but because we're Catholic, and it's our call to try to be there and to share this wonderful message with each and every one of them. I could do this for like 6 hours, but I got 20 minutes, and so if anybody has any questions, I'd be more than happy to try to answer them. People often ask, what is the program to become a deacon? The recommendation typically comes from the pastor to the archbishop by someone who he has either identified, or they have approached him, or perhaps somebody else in the parish has said, Father, look at so-and-so, they might be a good person. Those people, the deacon, potential deacon, and their wife are invited to information inquiry sessions, where we try to answer as many questions as we can about what's involved in the process and who is this person who's called to be what is referred to oftentimes as the icon of Christ the servant. And then after that, there's a lengthy application process. That whole information inquiry application takes just about a year, There's a psychological evaluation. There's review for the state of the marriage. So it's not a boom, here we go. It's an involved process with a lot of people involved, which is wonderful. Assuming that they kind of go through all of that in a good way, the Archbishop invites them into the aspirancy year, which is a formalized year of discernment. And then after that, again, if the recommendation of all the different committees and groups is to move forward, they move into candidacy, which is a 4-year program. 4 years of candidacy where they'll have, theology and philosophy and scripture and canon law, and not anywhere near, obviously, the kind of academic education that a priest gets, but enough to be dangerous. And then after that, they also are involved in a social ministry, a social justice ministry throughout their years of candidacy as well. So they have a real clear understanding of that being the foundation of who it is that they're being called to as a deacon. So are there any questions about it? Like, why would anybody do that?
How much the wives are involved?
Well, during formation, we invite the wives to participate in all of the programs, and many of them do come throughout the entire time. And they're welcome to participate in the classes. They don't have to take the tests. They don't have to write the papers. But it's wonderful to have the wives there because their perspective, they're involved in the dialogue, even in the classes. It's wonderful to have their perspective. When you ask how involved are the wives, how involved is the wife in the marriage? How involved is the husband in the marriage? That's how involved it is. We can't do our ministry as deacons without the full support of our wives. Because it does mean selflessly giving of some of their time, because all of a sudden, I've been married 43 years. I've been a deacon coming up on 12. For all those first 31 years, Susan and I sat together in Mass. All of a sudden, I'm on the altar and she's sitting in the pew by herself. That's a sacrifice. The wives willingly do it. They also remind us periodically that I come first, and that's a very good thing, But they're very involved. And then to the degree they want to get involved in the parish, but there is no such thing as a deaconess in the Catholic Church. Let's be real clear about that. Anything else? Yes, that is not to say they don't try, but that doesn't happen.
The bishop that I moved here from when I was at the cathedral in Minnesota threw down the gauntlet and let Rome know that he would no longer ordain any men deacons unless he let them ordain women. And he had his doctorate in whatever, and made an impassioned plea, but made us say that.
It's not to say that couldn't happen in our lifetime, because there is some reference to that in sacred scripture, but I think the church moves at full glacial speed, and so that, like everything else, will take its time. It'll be in God's time if that's what's meant to be. There are certainly some outstanding women that can do wonderful things in the church and do amazing things in the church, represented by people sitting in this room right now. So, but we say the same thing to men who are coming into this program and who sometimes we have to sit down with them and say, we're just not seeing this. We're not seeing you as a deacon. You're discerning, but we're discerning and we don't see it. And as the Archbishop has said, everybody isn't called to be a deacon any more than everybody's called to be a priest, just as everybody isn't called to be married. And we need really good ushers in the church as well. And so sometimes that's what we have to say to men, I thought that would go over better. Thank you so much for laughing at that. I really appreciate that, and that was not a plan. Thanks for laughing.
I was just going to say smack.
I do have a question.
Sure.
So what is the reason that women are not able to be deacons at this
Because
time?
it's a step in holy orders.
I understand.
Well, it has to, right, at this point, it does, clearly it has to do with the reality that you're receiving orders, and according to, at this point, the teaching of the church is that holy orders is restricted to men. We do not have time for that theological discussion. So here's what you should do. You go talk to Father Dennis, and he will give you all of that. I defer to him. He's fresh out of seminary. He's got a chapter and
He
verse.
knows it, he knows it. I think also, you know, we're called to marry, bury, baptize, teach, preach, and proclaim the gospel. And, you gave a good roundabout as to where the deacon, should function outside of the parish too. I sometimes feel lonesome coming into the parish because, there is just so much that's going on the outside world. You know, ministry to here, there, and everywhere. And, it's good to be called in for the liturgical duties of baptisms, especially. I mean, for me, it was the best part of being ordained,
Mhm.
that and doing marriages. But I've done enough funerals and wakes. When you get old, that's what you do, wakes and funerals.
It's 'cause
So
you
when
know
they start
everybody.
asking you to do that on a more frequent basis, then you know that you've reached that
Maturation as a deacon.
Yeah.
Well, I didn't want to get into great detail, but I alluded at the beginning that, every parish has its own customs, and every pastor has the right and the duty to make determinations about how the clergy are utilized in the parish, whether it's his parochial vicars or his deacons. And it's very challenging sometimes for a pastor when he comes in. I don't think I'm speaking out of turn, Father Fernando, when I say for a pastor when he comes in after, there's a standing culture that's been there for a very, very long time. Quite honestly, one of the first things the Archbishop will say to a pastor who's moving into an environment like that is, don't do anything right away. Take your time, get to know the community, let them get to know you, and then start talking about, what can happen, what can change, not in a oh, we need to change just because we need to change kind of a way, but because there may be some other ways of looking at things. So I think that takes time, and I think that every pastor, that's one of the great things that he has to pray about and balance and make decisions at some point about where's he going to best utilize the people that he has to help accomplish the responsibility he's been given as pastor, which is to serve the people in this local church. Here at Transfiguration, and even in the community that surrounds Transfiguration, over to the boundaries of the next parish. Frankly, it's a job that I'm delighted that as a deacon I will never have that responsibility. I got enough on my plate, but we try to. My office specifically tries to assist, and actually Father Fernando and I have worked even at other parishes, where he was, on challenges that sometimes crop up, with how to best work with a deacon. Or in some cases it reaches a point where you say, how do we best not work with this deacon? And we find a better place, a better fit, because at the end of the day we also are all human, and there's personalities, and we have to be sure that those personalities are going to work for the good of the community and of the organization.